Title for today is Managing Data in Biomedical Research, Pitfalls and Recommendations. And as you can see here, Julie and I work as clinical data managers in the Biostatistics and Data Management Core at Children's Hospital of Philadelphia. And these are our objectives here: to define data management, discuss common data management pitfalls, and also to review recommended data management procedures and evaluate various databases that are available at the Children's Hospital. Let me begin by saying that when Julie and I developed this presentation, we had in mind various investigators that work at the hospital, and mainly thinking of them as people who are responsible ultimately for the data. And it could also include project managers and statisticians. These are people who are responsible and also very interested in the data for any research study of any type. So the information that we have today just is basic information that applies for anybody doing research, clinical research, or that kind of project research. And usually when we all talk to each other, we usually say, I do research. And everybody does research in one sense or another, but perhaps today you'll learn a little bit more about what we do as clinical data managers, and as well as we try to help investigators. So to begin with this definition of data management, this is, reads like this: data management is the development, execution, and supervision of plans, policies, programs, and practices that control, protect, deliver, and enhance the value of data and information assets. A mouthful of information there, but we like this definition because at the end it mentions about enhancing the value of data. So it's good to remember that when we produce data at the end of a study, we're always adding that data to another bigger pool of data, and we should have as our goal quality data that we want to add to the bigger pool of data. So the idea that it enhances other data that's already out there in the scientific world. So here we list key data management elements for academic research institutions. This follows right along with the definition that I just read. So we would like to review specific procedures and how to document those things. Also discuss different data collection tools that are available. And also we want to keep in mind data security and data quality. And again, I should say that we would like to emphasize today data quality, and just to think about how much effort do we really need to put in to make sure that data is quality data. So why are data management procedures important? So the main word here is procedures. Number one, there is only one opportunity to collect data, and it's interesting to think about it in that way. If you're a statistician, for example, you might have many opportunities to perform analysis. It could be done any time in the future. But in terms of collecting the data, it is basically only one opportunity that you have. And it might take 6 months or a year, but however long it is, you just, when you plan your study, you should keep in mind that the whole data entry process of how it's collected at the clinical site, and then how it's put into the database system, whatever you're using. But also, just to think about without procedures and the idea of disorder, sometimes we visit other people's homes, and the question is, how clean is their home? Or everyone seems to always be asking, how clean is my home? They want to make sure their house is clean before they have a visitor. And the thing that I'm noticing is that there's people are comfortable with different levels of disorder. Some people are fine if their home is messy. They don't care if someone comes in. But other people are like very particular. They'll tell you a whole story how they cleaned their house for a week before they had a visitor. So just thinking about that analogy, when you consider doing a research study for a 5-year period, for example, you really should not just think about yourself and how comfortable you are with your own data, but you must realize that there's always somebody else looking at your data, and you want to keep that in mind. The last thing you want is for someone to classify your data as poor quality. Here we have a bunch of words that are synonymous with poor quality. Words like imperfect, inadequate, incomplete, inferior, and shabby and shoddy. So those are just a few examples. Now to talk a little bit about pitfalls. This is just a picture of somebody in a pit. It's a random picture. We don't know who it is or what's happening there, but we want you to think about the idea of falling into a pit, and usually it's this person who's ultimately responsible for the data, whether it's a statistician or the principal investigator on a study. We want to do whatever we can to help those people avoid the pitfalls. And I'd like to just review a couple of common pitfalls. These are really basic things, but sometimes you can fail to collect necessary data on a study. Sometimes you might collect too much data. We just heard in the earlier presentation about the vast amounts of data that are available out there and the tools to collect that information. And I just read in an article earlier this week in the New York Times. It's called the Science Times. Perhaps some of you read that. And it talked about, there was an article in there about bioinformatics, and it talked about the idea that the amount of data that we collect today has increased 100,000 times, just to give a rough number. But the idea of actually viewing the data, it's only increased by 2 times. So just the idea that you can really have a lot of data available, but what are you going to do with it? If you decide to ignore data after collecting it, then it could be a problem, because as you all know, when you collect the data, it has human involvement, and therefore there will be mistakes and errors. So other examples of pitfalls, you find out 2 years into your study that there's data that has been entered incorrectly, or perhaps you have lots of missing data, blank information in the database. Or another example, and by the way, these are based on real-life examples. Another example would be you find out your database system has been poorly designed and it's necessary to migrate the information into a completely new or a different database. And also the lack of documented procedures. If you don't document your procedure, then what you'll end up having is 3 different procedures because you had 3 different people working on the project. So to address these pitfalls, we'd like to just review some basic procedures that we practice on a regular basis at the BDMC where we work, but we would recommend these for any research study. And like I said, they're pretty basic. But number 1, during the study design, be sure to determine what resources are needed. And the key word here is during study design, meaning early on in your planning stage. So we list here different people that are very important to include in terms of data design. So the statistician, providing information about how to make sure those primary endpoints are met according to the protocol, the data manager and the IT manager ensuring that the right tools are being used and the information is collected in an efficient way. Number 2, be sure to choose an appropriate database. We will discuss different databases, including REDCap, which some of you may be familiar with, which is available at CHOP. But going along with the databases, you actually need to make sure that the person who's building it is actually qualified and experienced, and they go together. Number 3, the idea of training the data entry staff and providing written instructions. If you just sit down a person like a recent college grad, for example, of course they're very intelligent, but they're just going to use their own judgment when they enter the data. This is something which can be avoided with just very specific instructions about how to enter the data. Number 4, the idea of cleaning data. This is something which hopefully is a familiar term to you and to all researchers. By clean, we're referring to data which is complete and accurate. And what we do by regular practice is develop, essentially, just to give you an example, we might develop 300 or 400 edit check programs which are specific for each study. And they systematically, we run these programs to look for any inconsistencies in the data, including missing data. And we have a series of applications that are available to us, such as SAS programs and iReview, integrated review, and also advanced query tool, just to mention a few examples. We recommend that the data is reviewed ongoing throughout the study as opposed to at the end. We also recommend using real-time edit checks that fire, and this is something that happens during the actual entry process. I'm sure we've already talked about it in our early seminars. It's pretty basic. I guess it's not new technology anymore, but what we find is that from speaking with some of the investigators at the hospital and other people on projects is that they're not really using these systems that have these capabilities. That might be leaning more towards Microsoft Excel. And another thing we recommend is to utilize a test database. And just moving right along quickly here, It's important to assess the entire aspect of security and control for your database, and it's important to have a disaster recovery plan with a particular database. And then we list here different things like passwords and making sure it has an audit trail. Some of these things are not available in certain databases. And then number 8, the idea of documenting. By regular practice, we document these types of things that are listed here, such as database testing. This relates to validating a database. You need to have the actual documentation to show how you tested the data and what you did and the test data that you used. And then finally, to conclude my portion here, number 9, for a research study, if you want to do all these things and if you really are interested in quality data, then it's important to include enough hours in the budget for the data management activity up front. So those are just some basic things and procedures that we recommend. So at this time, I will now introduce Julie, and she'll complete the next part for us.
Thank you, Dave. So one of the things that Dave and I do at CHOP, we meet with investigators and we help them determine what their best choice is for a database. And what we do when we meet with them is we determine what the requirements are for the database. And I'm going to run through questions pretty quickly because Dave took up all my time. And sorry. So we're going to run through the questions that we typically ask the investigators when we're trying to determine what database we should use for them. The first question we ask is, what's your budget and what resources do you have? If you have a small budget and you have the resource of a study coordinator that's going to enter your data, clean your data, build your database, it's obviously going to be different than a larger study, a large grant that you have resources to have a database programmer build your database, have a data manager clean your data, have a SAS programmer extract that data. How much and what type of data are you going to collect? Are you collecting survey data? Is this going to be a 5-year study with 1,000 patients, or is this going to be a small study with 10 patients? Does your data need to be 21 CFR compliant? So if you're submitting your data to the FDA, there's a set of requirements that you need to follow. We have provided a link to a website that's going to provide more information on that. I could give a presentation on that alone. Are you going to collect your data through a web-based system, or is it going to be paper collection? And if you are using a paper collection system, are you going to use a double data entry feature, meaning 2 different entry operators are going to enter your data and then it's going to be compared, which is going to minimize your data entry errors? Do you need an integrated medical coding tool? So again, if you're submitting your data to the FDA and you need to categorize your ConMeds and your AEs, you would want to use an integrated coding system. Do you need an audit trail? Again, it's another requirement for FDA studies. What security features are available? Dave discussed those previously. Do you have an integrated discrepancy management feature available? That is near and dear to Dave and my heart. Being clinical data managers, we like edit checks. We like to check our data, and then we like a system that actually can detail what your errors are. We can then query this site, and everything is tracked in this discrepancy management system. What format do you want your data exported in? Can multiple users access your database? So if you have a multi-center study, you have 10 sites, you're going to want to ensure that 10 users can get into that database at the same time. Are there training tools available? There's some applications that have a training tool built right in. Others, you're going to have to develop your own training. Does your database need to interact with any other systems? So what we found in working with the CHOP investigators is that they use multiple databases and they have tons of different requirements. Everyone's different. But what we're going to go through now are just the relative strengths and limitations of 4 different tools or databases that we've found people use at CHOP. Microsoft Excel, Access, REDCap, and Oracle Clinical. And we're going to start, and I'm going to do this really quickly, we are going to start with everyone's favorite Excel. Everyone has had collected some sort of data or seen data collected in Excel. Everyone has access to it. It's easy to use. However, it is a powerful tool. However, it is not a relational database. You cannot customize your screens to look like your forms. There's no audit trail, and you know, what we found is that it's very difficult to control your study coordinator copying a version of the Excel spreadsheet, another person doing the same thing. You have 3 different Excel spreadsheets. Let's combine them now. We found that to be a problem. Microsoft Access, another very powerful tool. And I'll basically just say about Microsoft Access, this can be very powerful. You can definitely create, it can be, you know, Part 11 compliant. You can create audit trails. You can create queries. There's many things you can create. However, it has to be programmed. So if you have some sophisticated programming that you need, you're going to need someone who's able to do that. And the more that you need, the more time it's going to take and the more expensive it can become. REDCap is a database that we at the BDMC we love it. It's web-based. It was actually developed by Vanderbilt for academic institutions, and we found it to be intuitive. It's very user-friendly. It's very easy to program. It has some nice edit features that will fire real time. The few limitations that we have found are basically that it is not Part 11, CFR Part 11 compliant. And the other big limitation that we found is just that it is in a vertical format. So if you want it to match your case report forms, it's not going to do that. And lastly, the database that I'm going to talk about is Oracle Clinical. This is a commercial clinical data management system. It can basically accommodate any study that you need. Pharmaceutical companies use it. What we found is that the biggest limitation at CHOP is that it tends to be expensive. There are server and license fees that apply, and in order to program in it, you definitely need an experienced programmer that's going to be able to program. And we found that many times Oracle Clinical is a little bit, it may just provide more than is necessary for a small research study that's being conducted. So basically, in summary, as Dave had mentioned previously, what we are interested in is, as data managers, is the quality. And everyone's interested in quality of the data. You can only, data is basically what drives everything. It's how everyone's writing their papers. It's what they're using to analyze. And if your data is incomplete or inaccurate, it's going to be difficult to come up with the correct, or even to analyze your data. So I'm sorry that I had to be so quick. So, thank you.